So, but
Well,
yeah,
I'm excited too because I have to tell you, like, I have a ton of followers being like, "You should talk to Papa Gut. You should talk to him. He's really cool. Like, you guys should chat." I'm like, I would love to. And then you showed up in the comments like a ninja. I'm
yeah,
like,
yeah.
yes.
No, I've been.
Like,
I
I was
was.
amazed.
We have a surprising amount of like follower overlap because like
We
people tend to look at me as more of like a conservative. We have like a lot of we have a lot of people in my comments that like love you so much. So
That's
it's
totally. I was very happy to see that overlap. I thought it was absolutely great. And even some of the conservative following has been very progressive towards some of at least listening to my viewpoints.
oh yeah.
Not necessarily agreeing with it all, but at least being respectful, right? Just like you seem to be as well. So I'm completely, totally happy with it. So any questions you have, and I'm sure I have a couple questions I'm sure too, but I would
Oh
love
yeah,
to
you
answer
could ask.
anything. And
Yeah, sure. So yeah, I guess we're just gonna get started with the basics because it's like a little bit of like a podcast, and then we can talk about it because I do have questions about like because you said that you're gender fluid, right?
I am gender fluid.
So
That's
I'll ask you
correct.
more about that in a second. The first question I need to ask you is remember a while ago I could have swore you had your pronouns listed, but I'm not entirely sure what they are. And every
So
time,
you want to know something? Actually, that is actually a hot topic.
yeah,
I
okay,
don't actually list my pronouns. Not that listing them is a bad thing.
mm-hmm,
I go by he, him, right?
mm-hmm,
And for those who do list their pronouns, I think that is totally fine, right? But I think quite it's quite a statement to make, right? Like if
mm-hmm.
your bio is something that is very important, that should have your intents, that should have some important stuff on there, right? So I want people to know I'm a teacher. I want people to know what my name is. I want people to know kind of a little bit about my personality, what emojis I like, right?
Mm-hmm.
A pronoun replaces a proper noun, right? So if anything, I would think pronouns would be slightly less important. And that's my personal opinion after studying gender a little bit. But with that said, I do go by he, him, which is
Mm-hmm.
totally, that just works for me.
Okay,
But I like having conversations with people about it. I don't just want people to be like, oh, by the way, I'm he, him, call me that. You don't get to ask about it. I much rather be like, oh, why do you go by he, him if you're gender fluid? And I'd go, oh, well, the idea of gender, me growing up, I was called he, him. It never bothered me. So I
mm-hmm.
stuck with that. But when I started being called Mr. or Sir, that kind of irked my soul a little bit. I knew that wasn't the
Okay,
right title for me, right?
I gotcha.
So I knew
Okay.
that wasn't the right thing. And then I started growing like the mustache, and I was like, oh, I know that's not supposed to be there either. Yours looks great, by the way.
Oh,
But
thank
I
you.
knew when I grew one, I'm like, we got to do something about that. So it's just those types of things where I'm like, yeah, I realize that my pronouns he, him do work for me. It's easy for people, but I
Mhm.
know Mr. or Sir it just doesn't stick with me correctly. So
I
teacher
see.
Fambrini in the classroom.
I got you. So do you separate gender from I suppose like identity? Am I asking that the right way? Or
That
do you
is a great.
or rather sorry, let me rephrase that. Do you
That's
separate
a
pronouns from like your gender?
That's a great question. And, back when I was in college and doing a lot of work on this, it was really progressive to attach pronouns to gender. And now there's almost a move away from it. And it seems like a very generational thing, right? And I see a lot of Generation Z right now that do have pronouns that necessarily don't connect to gender.
Mhm.
I think this is a situation where it's to each his own, right? And I feel like I personally don't have the right to be like, oh, they're definitely connected or they're definitely not connected. I definitely think that there's a correlation, right? But that's for me personally, right? Like I wouldn't call myself, he, him unless I identified somewhat as male, right? And I feel like that's the connection right there. But with that said, technically I should go by they, them. If I'm
Mhm.
technically gender fluid, I should
Right,
play by the
okay.
rules and go by but for me that's just not my style. So there is a connection, but I don't think it's quite as linear as people make it out to be.
All right, that's fair. So let's backtrack a little bit because I remember you're I want to say new to the app ish. Like how long have you
I'm
been
a,
on this
I'm a
app?
little bit I'm a little bit new. So I definitely was a slow grow account. I never had like
Uh
a viral video or anything. I had like, not to be like the old school, but I even had Musically because I remember my students made me get
Oh,
it.
really?
Oh yeah, right. But I like didn't ruffle any feathers. I just posted my little educational content, a little makeup tutorial here and there. And 10,000 turned into 20, which turned into 50. And before you know it, it just
Mhm.
starts getting up there. And then people start being like, where'd this guy come from? And
Right.
now I'm here.
Because I could like, so I feel like you were smaller like before, like, by the beginning of the year. Did you really blow
I was
up?
so much smaller at the beginning
Yeah,
of the year. I only had at the beginning of the year, I think I had 60K, and then it
right,
kind of got, and then you hit that 60K point, and all of a sudden people are, oh, who's doesn't, and all of a sudden people are like, oh, they know who you are, and I'm like, oh my gosh, I hope I look okay, I hope I sound
right.
okay, I hope I'm not insulting anyone. So yeah, it's definitely been a bang all of a sudden.
Yeah, no, because I remember I started in April. So
Awesome.
and then like I remember like the two of us kind of grew side by side, and like
Yeah.
it was a huge time for growth because everything there was a lot of tensions going on with everything going on
Oh,
in the, with
absolutely. There always is. People love the drama. This is
yeah,
fact.
no. So I imagine people gravitated towards you because you were like the anti-drama, you know.
I try to be the anti-drama, and yet I attract so much of it, which is the problem.
I
But
saw a little bit of drama that you were engaged with. It wasn't big. It was like with the content creator Dr. Pepper Baby, a smaller account. They called you out
right,
for not speaking out enough against like I guess homophobic people or something.
yeah. So, and
Which is silly.
I do have that is I think my biggest critique, which, and not to put words in other people's mouth, but people think I'm not mean enough, or not
Right.
not like right, or I'm a little too lenient on homophobia, I guess. But to me, right, you're definitely going to want to educate somebody over calling them wrong, or homophobic or
Sure.
transphobic, right? Like if someone comes up to me and they're like, there are two genders, if I just say you're transphobic, I'm never going to talk to you, the conversation is over and no one got anything from it, right?
Sure.
But if I say, okay, what makes you think so? I'd love to hear your perspective before I give you mine, right?
Mhm.
Then we could have some growth maybe on both sides, right? Maybe I could learn something, right? But the idea, right, is that, as an educator and someone, in LGBTQ, I much rather grow from conversations than simply preach like, oh, you need to know this, that, and the other.
Sure, I get that. I mean, like, you're certainly much less aggressive than I am, but to an extent, I do a little bit of that, especially on here more. I like content on I don't know if you've ever looked at my TikTok content.
I actually have been,
I
I have to tell you, I have studied it a little bit. You're very articulate, you're
Oh,
very
thank you.
intelligent, certainly an intellectual. I have to say, you definitely tell it how it is, but it's all very factual, right?
I
The
try
things
to be
that you are
factual.
really upfront about, I have to say I agree with most of that. I was waiting to see some type of controversial video because everyone's like, you need to talk to Papa Gut. I'm waiting to see. I was waiting. I was like looking for the trans like phobe. I was looking for something transphobic, homophobic, or something, but everything was very progressive. You
Yeah,
had a lot of good trans information on there. I commented. I was like, wow, this is a better explanation than I could give. So I'm waiting for the drama, but I don't. It
a
might
lot
be slightly
a lot of
anticlimactic for
yeah,
people.
no, a lot of people, I guess I could consider myself kind of a like I don't know, sometimes I say like new age conservative because I just feel like
Got you.
conservatism right now is just being stuck. Conservatism right now is being as far stuck as possible,
I
resisting
got
all
you.
change. I like to take proper steps forward with change, but yeah, a lot of
And you
people.
definitely do that in your videos.
I try
Definitely.
to, I have my ups and
I
downs.
definitely see it. I fully appreciate it. I hit the follow button.
Well,
You have a new
I
follower from
appreciate
me.
that. I hit
No
it,
problem.
because a lot of times people are like, oh, he doesn't get it, he's transphobic, this, that, anything. Um, but like, yeah, no, I think that there's a lot of people tend to gravitate away from or stay away from me, like a lot of progressive people, because I'm very blunt, and like I don't particularly care for like overly political correctness stuff like that. You know what I mean? That's
Right.
so. But to talk about. So I've been desperate to talk to somebody that's gender fluid about like gender fluidity and understanding because probably the
Right.
beginning of the year I wasn't super validating of trans people in general.
I get that.
Then I slowly started to understand more and more, and a big part of it's because nobody wants to talk about it.
I
It's
got it.
it's
Right.
it's very hard to find like somebody that's gender fluid or anything that'll like sit down and be like,
right.
oh, okay. So I think we'll start, I guess, like a beginning point, and then we'll just kind of display our opinions on the situation. And that's
I
like
love that.
that's one of the things too is a lot of I've had conversation with other creators, and
Yeah.
they talk about gender as if it's like a fact or not. I think one of the
Yeah.
biggest things that I've come to the realization is that people constantly say like, oh, gender is what do they say? It's what the fuck am I now? I completely
Is
lost
it?
it.
It happens to me every
Social
day.
construct, social
Social
construct.
construct. Yeah,
And
I
then
got you.
a lot of times people will say, "Oh, it's a social construct," as like I won, but what it really is a social construct, as in like society has
Mhm.
the ability to like to have a say on it in the sense of
Right.
like honestly, at the end of the day, it could work either way as a society.
Right.
It doesn't necessarily matter per se. So like it's not necessarily a hardline fact to have a conversation about the difference between gender and sex. But
Right.
but like we can function either way, but like, why not function in a more progressive way? And that's where I've been coming from slowly.
And I definitely saw that in your videos. It was very progressive. Loved the nail polish video, by the way. The
Yeah,
boys
no, I
can't wear
do.
nails.
I do.
That was a good one. I appreciate that. I hit the like button right quick.
Oh,
On
did you?
that
That's
one.
very funny.
Oh, I liked that one real quick.
That's one of the things is I'm
But
not.
and that's the thing, right? And then I have to preface that one thing, right? Why it is, and this is personally for me, I'm not saying this is the entire community, right? It is sometimes tricky to get people to talk about being gender fluid, right?
Mhm.
Or non-binary. Because like for example, me, I'm gender fluid. And even though I am, I still don't know all the answers, right? And I feel like sometimes, I know me personally, right? Sometimes I'm a little bit worried to talk about it too long because I'm afraid, like, oh, what if I answer something wrong? Like if I am it, I should know every answer to it, right? But that's
Mhm.
not always the case, right? These are identities we're talking about. They shift, right? They change, new aspects are introduced, right? So I think one of the reasons why it's sometimes tricky to get full explanations is because no one has a perfect answer. I certainly don't. So I'll definitely do the best
Sure.
I can.
All right. Yes. Great. So I'm gonna start from the just from the top. So,
Tippy top.
so for me, I differentiate. I think the trans people that have dysphoria and don't. And
Right.
like, and that's like kind of where I start with it because I am pretty much fully validating of people with gender dysphoria when it comes to them being trans. When it comes to
Right.
people who don't have gender dysphoria, it gets tricky for me
I
because
get that.
specifically because it seems like it's diminishing to people with gender dysphoria when you
I got
latch
you.
onto that identity, say, hey, listen, I'm trans as well. I think that me personally, it would be almost, I wouldn't have like an issue with it if there was some differentiating name, but because there's
Oh,
name.
interesting.
Yeah,
Yeah.
but for me, like, I very much centers around the idea of like diminishing people with gender dysphoria. I know that's something that's very difficult to manage and deal with. I've talked to people who trans people with dysphoria in like a romantic sense. It's very
Right.
intense for them, and so
I get
some
that.
of it seems like, I'm not saying all people who don't have dysphoria are trans trenders, but it's hard to
Right.
differentiate it, and it also, again, like I said, it seems diminishing. So I don't know what your perspective on that is.
And that's a very interesting point, right? And I think that you definitely touched on something important, which is the language isn't perfect because there's no differentiating word, right?
Hmm.
And whether or not there should be, of course, it's up in the air. But again, the language is not perfect, right? And I think that's a point, right? Now, here's a new perspective that I would just say to like maybe consider.
Hmm.
So like for example, me, being gender fluid. For me, the only gender dysphoria that occurred for me was when I was pretty young. I was 13. I grew facial hair. I did not, right? I didn't, that was not my thing. It really, really bothered me. I refused to touch a razor. I got it lasered off, right? So
Okay.
that was my only thing with gender dysphoria, right? Still to this day, I could only naturally grow hair right here because it's the only place that wouldn't be lasered off, right? But with that said, currently, right? I don't have any intense gender dysphoria, right?
Hmm.
That would cause me to identify as gender fluid. But let me give you like this situation.
Hmm.
Um, let's say tomorrow you or anyone watching this woke up as the complete other gender, right?
Hmm.
I am told by some people they would really freak out. They would be
Sure.
like, "What the?" It now for me, although I don't have gender dysphoria right now, if I wake up tomorrow and I am magically a girl, I'd be like, "Okay, I'm going to go to work like normal." It
Hmm.
would not faze me. I would not. I would look in the mirror and be like, "That's weird. I don't remember. I don't remember." Okay, cool. And then I would move on, right? So that's the question, right? Do I have dysphoria? No. But is my mindset in a place that would allow me to transition if it did biologically happen with ease? Yes, definitely, right?
Hmm.
So that would be maybe my other thing is okay, I don't have the dysphoria aspect that makes me gender fluid, but I do have a certain mindset, personality, some people like to call it instead of gender, right? But I do have something in me that would
Hmm.
make it very easy for me to be a girl and then a boy again if somehow some weird
Right.
chemical
I
reaction
understand
happened
what
and
you mean.
that occurred. Right.
Could
Okay.
I ask you a question? Because when you came to that example, if you woke up with like much more male identifying features, would that freak you out? 'Cause-
That's actually a great
yeah,
point, right?
because it
So
seemed like you
if
had some dysphoria associated with like more
and that
male
is such a
features.
great question, right? And with that said, if I woke up again, your beard looks fantastic,
Right.
right? But if I woke up with a beard, I'd be like, this is incorrect,
Right.
right? That would make me like, not 100%, right?
Mhm.
And I feel like that is actually a really important differentiating factor that I have to say I haven't considered until you just brought it
Right.
up, which points to again my thinking, oh, see, like, I don't have the answers to everything. So I think you bring up a great point there.
Yeah, because it seems like, to an extent, like I've also talked to people about like the intensity of dysphoria and at what
Right.
point does it become valid or not. And for me, it's really very simply some type of like, I mean, usually for me, it's like a diagnosis. And so
Right.
like some people don't, I think this is actually an issue with some people where they're forced to, just because they have dysphoria, people think that there's a goal to like look exactly like whatever identifiable gender that they identify with.
Got it.
And for me, I don't have an issue with that. I think that if you have dysphoria, if your only thing you need to do is, for in your instance, to not have like more male features, and you don't need
Right.
to go through like surgery or anything else. I don't know what you're on, and I'm not going to ask. But like, I have
Right,
no problem with,
and
with
just so
that.
you know, I'm actually very open about these things. Just so you know, I never actually was on any type of hormone blockers. My voice is just like this.
Right.
But I actually I'm on no type of hormones or anything. I actually just for fun, I actually tested my testosterone level to see if it was below average. It's
Uh-huh.
actually 100% average. So average amount of
Okay.
testosterone and estrogen for a normal male cisgendered individual.
Mhm.
But nope, I'm not waking up with a beard anytime soon. That
Right.
is cut off with that.
Right, and that's one of those things where it's like, like I was saying, um, just because somebody's trans doesn't mean that they have to try to fit the mold of like whatever
Right.
gender, the opposite gender, or the opposite gender or whatever. And
I
I think
no, but I completely agree
there's
with
like
that.
toxicity in the sense of like, because then it gets into this whole thing where, just like actually trans women or trans men that aren't necessarily passable, they're looked down upon in society. And I don't think that your passability is something
Right.
that makes you more or less a boy or a girl. It's just
Right.
like, it's a very complicated thing, but I think that like it's, the gender dysphoria is where I would generally start, but the intensity of it isn't exactly there.
Yeah.
So for people who simply identify, who have no type of, let's say a biological, not biological, let's say I guess I'll say biological, just in this,
Yeah,
just for
just
this,
to
just for the,
differentiate,
yeah, just for the to
to
be,
keep it clear, right?
yeah,
And I
yeah,
think that's something, just so you know, I'm fine with, and I've gotten in trouble for that before. But I think,
yeah.
if you want to differentiate using science, right? I'm a
Right.
teacher. I
Well,
have to
I
teach.
would normally say trans or cis, but the reason I'm using biological is
Yeah,
it's only because it's like contextually accurate to the situation.
I got you.
So
Makes
like a
sense.
biological woman who's presenting as a woman who simply
Okay.
identifies as a man. Was that
Right.
something that's is that something that you're validating of?
That's a really great question, right? So, and let's like take it a step further, right? Like, and it's just because I want to push the envelope, right?
Mhm.
We have that, and now we have even more. Now we have he him lesbians, right? Like
Right.
now we have lesbians, which is biological women, and a lesbian is a woman, but
Sure.
gender identifies as a woman who likes other women, but whose pronouns are he him, right? Which that right, and there you go, right? Does that even make sense? Is the question,
Right.
right?
Yeah, I would say no. I just
Right,
like
right. And does that even make sense? Or what you said, right? Is biological a woman who presents herself as a woman, but he him, right? Is that valid, and does it make sense? And not to give you an anticlimactic answer, but I never felt the need to validate or invalidate anyone.
Mhm.
People literally, and maybe that's the teacher in me, right? But if someone walks in and they're like, I want to be a girl today and call me Samantha, I'd be like, Samantha, please sit down. You have work
Right.
to do, right? And that's where I think
And I
where
would
I
do
get
that
the
too. I think it's the more
right,
the like
right,
whether
and that's
whether
the deal,
how much it means to people. And like, when it comes down to it,
right?
I'll just, because I had somebody asked me a question a while ago, and they're just like,
Yeah,
what does it really matter? And like, it
right,
honestly doesn't. Like, I'm just gonna be honest
right,
with
and
you.
that's the deal,
It
right?
does,
It
and I
doesn't
know it
matter.
doesn't. I know that
It
it doesn't.
I get it, right? And
Yeah,
that's the
yeah.
thing, right? So
I,
does it matter, right?
it
And
really doesn't.
and you see me, right? I'll call myself out. Am I dodging the question a little bit right now?
Mhm.
Absolutely. You have me screen recorded. I had a perfect opportunity to say you are bigoted. Absolutely, they're valid. Da, 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 and I dodged the question. And I
Mhm.
dodged the question because it is not my place to validate or invalidate someone. So, with that said, in my opinion, there has to be mutual respect on each side.
Sure, I
So
get
if
that.
someone says, I'm a woman, I present myself as a woman, but you have to call me he, him.
Hmm.
I would say, okay, cool. That's understandable. I got that, right? But with that said, if they run into someone who it they're not game. They are like, there's no way I'm calling you he, him. I don't think so, right?
Right.
You need to have, if you're a certain age, right? If you're an adult, right? You need to be able to have the self-awareness to be like, okay, now my identity is conflicting with how you see me. We're just going to have to move on. I'm not
Right.
going to
Yeah.
cancel
There's
you for it. I'm not going to call you a horrible person for it. We're seeing me differently, and we have to be okay with that.
sure. I get that.
Yeah. So that's just my take on it.
I understand that completely. It's a very mature
Great.
take because some people will get very upset. But back because like before, like we were saying, like it doesn't matter, right?
Right.
But then everybody has their own. I mean, it's all about like personal assignments to different things, right? So
Right.
people, trans people have like a particular assignment with gender and sex, and then so do cis people, and then varying in between. I mean, everybody has their own
Right.
at
Of
the end of the
course.
day. So like for me, and I think for a lot of other people, and this is where I try to come from, is like some kind of a logical rule set when it comes to like
Right.
changing in general, right? So
Right.
unfortunately, in this sense, I guess we wouldn't even say just trans people, but people who are validating of different of genders and whatnot they have like the burden of proof on them. And
Right.
like
I
that's
get
how I
that. Yeah.
construct like my logical rules that I say, because I don't think that being trans is illogical at all. I mean, it actually
Right. I get if
I
there's some logic
yeah,
and chemistry there, right? We
sure,
have some
yeah.
scientific proof now, which is kind of nice.
Right. And
Yeah.
like so like that's where I come from with it. And like I understand that doesn't necessarily matter. But then it's like, so why a lot of people will say like, well, why does it matter so much to me? And then I would question it
Mhm.
back, like, why does it necessarily matter so much to other people to not,
Oh,
you know what I mean? So like that
uh-huh. Right. Okay.
so
Okay.
now we all have
That
our
was
different interpretations of
that
how
was
much
nicely
gender matter.
played,
Yeah, right.
right? So it's
And
like, well, why does it matter to you? It's like, oh, right, and you can flip it,
yeah,
right?
right.
So I can say, I'm gender fluid. Why does it matter so much that you won't call me gender fluid? You can flip that on me and be like, well, why does it matter so much that I use the word gender fluid?
Right,
And
yeah.
that is a very valid argument, right? That is an extremely valid argument, because I can't say, oh, well, it matters a lot to me, but the way you see it can't matter, right? And I
Hmm.
think that's where we get into conflict with other people, and whose identity matters more, right? So with that said, right, and here's the tricky one, right, is that here's the issue. We don't want to get into comparing, right? But
Right.
who is it going to hurt more, right?
I
That's the
get that.
question.
Sure.
And that's the only thing that I wouldn't even say it needs to be a competition, but I would ask somebody to consider, right? So let's say we have, a 18-year-old on TikTok, right, who's very, very conservative, and we have a 13-year-old on TikTok,
Hmm.
and they're gender fluid, right? And they go by they them. And the 18-year-old says, not going to call you they them. That's ridiculous, and it's against how I was raised. And the 13-year-old goes, no, but this is who I am as a person.
Hmm.
Who's going to take the bigger loss if they're not validated, right?
Yeah, sure.
Right? And that's the only thing I would say, right? Because both opinions matter, right? But who's going to be hurt more in the long run? And I think I get into trouble with that because, right, people comment on my page, oh, only two genders, da, 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 da. I'm like, okay, right. I'm not going to freak out
Right,
about it. I'm
yeah.
not hurt by it. I'm 26, right? You can say that being gay is wrong and there's only two genders. I'm not going to go cry about it. I'm fine, right? But
Right,
some
I understand.
people, some people are not there yet. And I think we need to be conscious, like, okay, if some people don't have that self-awareness and that confidence yet, that took years to build. I'm not discounting that, right? Took years to build. It's not something you just get overnight. But we need to be aware, like, okay, who's going to take the bigger hit if they're not validated? Is it the
Right.
person judging or the person living the experience?
I
And that's what
understand
I
what you're
think we
saying.
need to
So it's
consider.
like
That's all.
it's like a mental fragility type of thing, and that's
Yes.
not in like a bad way. I understand exactly
Not
what
in a
you're
bad
saying.
way. And I appreciate how you
Yeah,
said
yeah,
not in a bad way,
yeah.
right? Like
Right.
who's gonna take the bigger hit,
Sure, I
right?
get that.
Okay, that's my
Yeah,
only thing, right?
because for
So
me,
like,
because
yeah,
I think that if I was gonna like interpret it my own way, it's for me. It comes from like and again, not to I use blunt words, the treatment of
right,
the individual, right? So if somebody's treatment would be to be being validated, why
right,
not? Like, what's the offset? What's the negative to like validating somebody? If that's what they need to be happy in society, then why
right.
not? Meanwhile, you have a conservative person, like you said before, like it doesn't really matter to them in the same way. And a lot of conservatives will say, like, oh, how do you quantify that? And I'd be like, well, it's common sense, right?
Well,
Like,
it's
you really
complicated,
don't give
right?
a shit.
Yeah.
Well, they don't give a shit. Like, honestly, it's,
How do you
you know,
quantify that? But in the end, right? you know, right? Like
Right,
in
yeah,
the end,
yeah.
how do you quantify who it matters more to? You just kind of know.
It would
And
be
we can
bizarre.
literally, yeah,
It would be bizarre
yeah,
if like a conservative cisgendered male like felt that strongly about gender
yeah, right.
identity,
And
where
now here's the deal, right? And here's the deal that, and I watch me get in trouble for this one, right? I had a family that I taught kindergarten to.
Mhm.
Dude, this, oh,
Oh, there you
this, this, oh, I'm here. Are you there?
go.
You there?
Yeah, I'm right here. I'm right here. It
Perfect.
scared me.
Okay.
It scared me.
Um, okay. So I had a family that the dad grew up very religious, right?
Mhm.
Very, very religious. Um, saying teacher Fambrini to him was not an option. It was not an option for him.
Really
It was not an option. I was Mr. Fambrini to him, right? And
interesting.
it became very apparent after I corrected him the fourth, the fifth, the sixth, the seventh, the eighth, the ninth, the 10th time. It was clear that this was actually a situation where he would actually take the bigger loss
Mhm.
if he called me teacher Fambrini than me just dealing with the fact that he was calling me Mr. every time, because I'm secure in myself, right? So I'm
Sure.
not saying the other side is invalid, right? There is some people that have super intense morals that are ingrained in them, right? And they will take a loss, and that can be validated, right?
I get. Yeah,
Um,
I understand exactly what you're saying.
right?
Yeah, sure.
But usually, right, with that said, like you said, if I can kind of quote you right now,
Sure.
the burden of proof kind of goes on the trans individual, right? And since the burden of proof does go on the trans individual, that in itself kind of shows they have a little bit more to lose from the situation. A little bit. In my personal opinion, that's my own take on it.
I get that. It's very interesting because I think that like there was a time where if I had a teacher such as yourself, or for my
Yeah.
student, or my excuse me, for my kid, I would might make
Yeah.
me uncomfortable. But then it gets to the
Right.
point of like, and not I wouldn't say anymore. There was a time though, but
No, of course.
now when you think about it though, it's like, well, what's gonna happen to my kid? Like
Right.
like that, because that
Right.
when it comes down to like what's the negative, like what's the negative to my kid being taught by you, and it's like, well, what is my kid's not gonna become trans, like
Right.
you know what
and
I
and
mean, it's just like
and that's the deal, right? And I think, but with that said, right, I get people get worried, right? They're like, oh frick, dude, I am in Desi's class. My kid is gonna grow up they're gonna be
yeah,
gender fluid.
right,
Oh my
yeah,
god.
right, it's
Parents that thought that, right? But and I do sometimes I run what are called race checks, right?
mhm.
Where I think we as a society have, oh, I'm so sorry I keep losing you.
It's
We're good?
no
Wi-Fi's
problem, it's
good?
no problem, yeah, we're good.
Perfect. Okay. So here's the deal. We as a society have made a lot of progress towards racial equality, and we still have a long way to go, right? But I do what's called the race check. I just replace it with race. So would you ever be worried and put, like, if your kid was in my class, would you ever think to yourself, oh, I'm really worried. I don't want my kid to play basketball. Desi's black. If
Right,
he's
they're gonna
if
turn
he's my
black.
kid's teacher, what if my kid ends up playing basketball? I do not want my kid playing basketball. I want my kid to play the piano. That'd be ridiculous, right?
I get what you're saying, because I would say
So that
when it comes to this like argument, it seems like you're saying like, oh, what, like you're not gonna become black just because you have a black teacher kind of thing.
exactly, and
I
you're
would
not going to
say
become gender
because
right. Yeah,
because like at the end of the day, like I would, you're at the worst case scenario, your kid's gonna learn how to like understand it and of other people, the
exactly.
understanding of other people. It's not like a net loss for them. But that's
Right.
like an interesting thing because it almost brings it to the comparison between gender identity and then even racial identity.
I
And like
know, right?
there were people who were like memeing it like a little while ago where they're like, oh, I'm
Yeah.
transracial. Um,
Oh yeah.
and then, but you do see that there is such thing as transracial when it comes to people adopted by different people of
Right.
different races, and they kind of absorb some of the culture. And then you could tie that
I
into
got
the
that.
idea of like race not really existing until the 1600s, until it was like created.
Ah, very good point right there.
And then it comes into this whole thing where it's about again treatment methods kind of a thing,
Right.
because you don't see anybody like walking around that's transracial that's legitimately looking to like actually shift their entire race.
Right. I think we've had one case that was heavily publicized when it did happen.
Did
And
we? But
we did, right? We had that woman who was biologically, she was Caucasian, and she got the spray tan and permed her hair, and it was a big deal when I was in
oh,
college,
was
right?
it? I don't even
It was,
know.
oh, check the records, dude. She was
I'll
in
have to
government, she was
look.
in political office too,
Oh, I
right?
think I know who you're
It's
talking about
happened.
actually.
It's happened once,
Um,
right? So it's
and that's, I would
happened.
consider that an outlier though, because there's one person doing
It is
that
an absolute
versus
outlier, right?
yeah, no.
And again, right, the exception proves the rule. So I'll take it on that, right? But with that said, And I actually have spoken about the transracial thing, which actually did that turned some heads, right? I got a little bit of flack from that because I said transracial most of the time not too valid, oof, right? We don't
Right,
like
yeah,
that,
yeah.
but and I got some flack from that. And the way I described it is, if you say like I feel more black, right?
Mhm.
That is literally we have proven that melanin, it's skin deep. Being black is not. It's not a thing, right? You
Mhm.
If you are black, you don't act more this way necessarily, right?
Right.
And that's the deal, right? So when you're black, you are treated differently, but you don't necessarily feel a different way. You have a culture, but it's biologically there's nothing different besides the skin tone, right?
Right.
So if you say I'm transracial, that means in my opinion you are thinking, oh, black people are more like this and I have to identify with this more. And to me that's not okay, right?
Yeah,
Because that's racist. Yeah.
yeah, sure.
But
I
anyway,
think that gets into like a whole complicated other thing because then people actually, I've had a conversation. We talked about invalidating other black people based on their blackness. It was a
right.
black
Oh
guy.
my gosh, I all the time. I
Yeah,
grew up, everyone calls me
yeah,
lawyer by the way I
and
talk and everything. Right.
right,
I
it
get
gets into
that.
like this whole complicated thing because I've had a
Very
because I
complicated.
took a stance of like I don't think like basically conservative black people should be invalidated. We had a whole conversation about blackness. It's very interesting how all this goes crazy, and like you can
Oh,
really get
very
into these
quickly.
very deep conversations. Because I agree with you.
Oh,
Like being black is simply just as color, but then there are cultures associated with being black, the
right.
stereotypical cultures, of course. Um,
Of course.
I don't even know. Oh yeah, I had just brought it up to talk about like the treatment methods when it
The
comes down
treatment
to it,
methods, and there
and
are none when it comes to
yeah,
transracial.
if there
Right.
is any, if it's just cultural, it's like okay, then I guess act in your perception of black. Whereas when it comes to trans people, there's like the treatment of like being validated, potentially needing a therapist, potentially needing hormones, and potentially needing surgery. And like I come from
Right.
that. That's where I come from for validating trans people because like you
Right.
can create that thing. Right.
I
And if that's
got you.
all it takes, then like what is it? You know what I mean? Like what does it actually hurt society in order to go with that? I think
I get that.
there's an argument to be had about, and like you could call I know we're getting a little off topic, but you
No,
can
it's
call it
good.
you can call it conversion therapy,
Right.
in the sense of like becoming the gender you identify with or more identifying with it,
I
as
get
in
that.
the
Yeah.
same sense where you can call it conversion therapy to force for you to stay. But then also it's like
Ah.
how harsh is that conversion therapy? Because I think that there's an argument
Mhm.
to be made if like you would give hormones to like a trans individual so that they can feel more like the gender they identify with. Why not
Right.
potentially give them hormones that would make them? You know what I mean? I'm not saying they should be forced to
Oh.
do that, but the
Oh, that
option,
was interesting.
but the
Okay.
but the
I
option
got
for
you.
that treatment I think should exist, and I think some people,
Okay.
you know
So
what I'm
my
saying?
question to
Sure.
that, right? And I'm in no way insulted by
No,
that.
no,
I just
no.
have to, right? I have to just say that is a point that I haven't necessarily heard before
Yeah,
in
right.
such, you said it in a very intellectual yet accessible way. So I appreciate that.
Yeah, sure.
Thank you. I would
Thank you.
I would ask you maybe to like maybe think of hormone blockers
Hmm.
as possibly something that are in that realm, right?
Do you think so?
So okay, so not completely, right? Not completely, not exactly, right? Not exactly. But we do have, instances, we have 10, 11, 12-year olds
Hmm.
that are currently experiencing gender dysphoria. And just so you know, my and it was a baby when I was about 14 or 15. My mom gave me the option. She's like, hormone blockers are a possibility. My mom actually bisexual, queer community, so that was actually I said no actually, because I was a little worried. And with that said, but I would say hormone blockers are the closest thing to
Hmm.
what you described so well, which would be to treat it temporarily
Hmm.
until we know if it's an actual dysphoria, right?
Sure.
And I would compare that to, when you are being treated for an illness, but the doctor says, okay, but let's see how bad it really gets before we take a course of treatment.
Hmm.
That's what hormone blockers would be in my opinion, right? Now, with this said, we have to be careful because, of course, being trans is not an illness, right? But dysphoria can be damaging.
Hmm.
But I see your point, right?
I do have a
But
question. I know
yes,
I know that you're another point, but I tend to forget.
yeah, tell me
Sorry.
always.
So, do you think that gender dysphoria should be classified as a mental illness?
That's a great question, right?
I know it's
And
a harsh question.
no, it is not. It's an absolute question, right? And we cannot, right? And I will say up front, gay, that in no way is an illness. We've taken that out. We have
Sure.
taken that completely out, right? And we've taken out someone trans from being considered mentally ill. They're not mentally ill, right?
Hmm.
So here's where I would have to say is that people that experience gender dysphoria, I would call it an event,
Hmm.
right? And I know that's a very cookie cutter, sugar coated way of saying it, right?
Right.
And you know me, I'm known for not causing drama, right?
Right.
But as soon as I call gender dysphoria an illness, I have to call it a problem, and I can't do that.
Hmm.
I can't do that because it happens naturally, right?
Sure.
It's just an event that occurs. In my personal opinion, I think people are born with the predisposition and chemicals and environment that cause somebody to be trans, right? So
Yeah.
I can't
That
call
part
it
I
an
agree
illness.
with.
I can't quite call it an illness, right? But I can call it an event that needs to be taken care of, right? And that's the farthest I'm willing to go, right? And
Hmm.
then, we do have other instances, right? It's not, and this one is a big shift to the left or right. But like we have instances where people that are deaf, right?
Hmm.
They don't think of being deaf as an illness. It's just an event. And then when they get to a certain age, they get a cochlear implant. But being deaf is still their culture, right?
Yeah, I know.
And
Actually, there's actually a very big deaf culture that I had no
right.
idea
Oh
about.
yeah.
I just wanted to bring it up.
I
It's
also
crazy.
am an ASL. I'm also an ASL tutor, right? So I had to study deaf culture a lot in college. So I'm just saying there are instances where something can feel out of place, but
Hmm.
it's not necessarily an illness, right? Because
Right.
we want to accept the person and accept their experience without judging it or saying that there is something wrong with them.
Sure, I get
And
that.
that's my personal take on it, though.
Yeah.
But there's another side to that, right? Which I'm
Right.
sure you can
Yeah.
come up with, right?
Yeah.
Like,
Right.
well, if it's
That's
not
what.
an illness,
Of course.
why do you need to fix
Well,
something that isn't an illness?
no.
Right?
Right. Well, my thing right off the bat, because I would
Right.
consider it because it is listed as like a mental illness.
Yeah, it
The,
is. Yeah,
the verbiage is very harsh, and I
it is.
think that most times the reason I think that people tend to stay away from labeling it as such and when they're more
Yeah.
progressive is because conservatives use it as a way to diminish somebody. They'll be like, "Oh,
Right.
well, I have gender dysphoria." Like, "Oh, well, you have a mental illness, so like you're invalid."
Yeah.
I don't agree with that. Me personally, I
I
think
don't-
that it's just a
right.
classifier, right? Like ADHD is a mental disorder as well, but like
Right. Absolutely.
nobody invalidates you because you have ADHD. Nobody, people are very harsh when it comes to people with gender dysphoria, but they don't have that same harshness for chronic anxiety, chronic depression, ADHD.
right?
None
And
of that.
I will back up what you're saying, not only from an academic standpoint, but from a personal experience, right?
Mhm.
So somebody who's gender fluid, but also diagnosed with ADHD.
Oh, do you have
I've had
ADHD?
a lot. Oh yeah, dude.
I do too, actually.
I'm the whole package, homeboy.
There you go.
But I've had a lot more critique with my gender fluid identity than my ADHD, and that's a lived experience. So I appreciate you for pointing
No,
that
yeah,
out.
because I have ADHD too, and like a lot of the things that I did wrong, sometimes like people would just give you a lot of a break. They'd be like, "Oh, you have ADHD, we'll give you a break."
Oh,
But when it
yeah,
comes
right,
to
no
when
big
it comes to gender dysphoria or being trans, I don't think that courtesy is given.
Right, and ADHD, right? And if you look at it from an educational perspective, because now we're getting a little bit into my realm, right?
Right.
ADHD, right? What is it? It's an illness. It's qualified under a 504. Those are medical documents, right? If you have, it's not even considered a learning disability. That's an IEP in schools.
Mhm.
ADHD is a 504 accommodation, so it's an illness, but
Mhm.
it's also a way of being. It's not necessarily that there's something wrong with
Right,
people
and
with ADHD.
that's what I would apply that same logic to
Right,
gender
and the
dysphoria. Where
exact brilliant
yeah,
crossover. I wish I came up with it myself.
I do consider it to be an illness in the sense where like you said, I don't think that being trans is wrong, but I think
Right.
that like it's wrong in the sense where you need help. If that
Yeah.
makes it, yeah. And so
Right,
like
of course.
for me, very bluntly, the diagnosis of an illness or simply means like how do we fix it. And when I
Right.
say fix it, I don't mean like get rid of it. I mean how do we make
Get
the
rid of it,
individual
right?
with it
But
more
remedy the
comfortable?
situation.
How do we treat
Right.
it so that the person is comfortable and happy? And the two ways to
Absolutely.
do that would be either to have them, I think this is personal preference, whether they want to gravitate more towards their gender identity, or maybe in some cases there are some people who want to gravitate more towards their biological sex. I don't know if that's really an available treatment method for people.
Right.
I think it's to be
And
considered. That's literally all I bring it up
right.
for.
And no, and here's the deal, right? Is that here's where I get in a little bit of trouble with my own community, right?
Mhm.
Because to consider something doesn't make you a bigoted person. like the idea of, oh, well, why don't we treat somebody to make them more close to their biological gender
Mhm.
is a very intense thought when you hear it for the first time.
Right.
But it does have to be considered, right? I'm not
Yeah.
going to cancel you for
Well, people
saying it.
jump to the idea of like, "Oh, I'm gonna force you to feel this way," rather than
Yeah,
say like, "Hey, what
right,
if somebody wanted that to be their treatment
and
method?"
that's the deal, right? And I feel like that's a valid question, right? Maybe it should be an option. Now, with that said, I think we have hormone blockers. I
Sure.
think that we have the idea of, right, there's the therapy required, right, which in a way is a little bit
Mhm.
like, okay, you sure you want to do this, right? Like, it's a
Right,
little
yeah,
bit.
yeah. Right.
So we do have some system set up that it's not like a quick fix, right? It's not
Oh,
like,
for sure. It takes quite a
but
while, yeah.
we don't necessarily have, testosterone shots for people that are feeling like they may need to transition to female, right?
Right.
We don't have testosterone shots for them. That's not an available option yet. Does it need to be considered? I think there's a conversation that could be had. I think a conversation can be had about it. But I don't think necessarily we should make it a viable option quite yet until we have a little bit more research
I
backed by
understand
it.
what you're saying.
Yeah.
So to the point you had brought up, being gay and, like, you
Yeah.
brought up the removal of homosexuality from, like, I think it was on the DSM, right? And,
Yeah.
like, people say that I just wanted to bring it up just to be completely contextually accurate because
Yeah.
a lot of people will say, like, "Oh, well, I don't think that gender dysphoria should be listed because being gay used to be listed and it's not anymore." I would
Right.
say when it came to, gay people being listed or homosexual people being listed, um,
Yeah.
some of the qualifiers for it are an immense amount of distress, right, associated with
Right.
your identity. For gay people, the 100% of the distress, I would say, comes from society's interpretation
Right.
of them. When it comes to
Right.
trans
Right. Right.
people, I would say even if there was 100% societal acceptance, I still think that if an individual who wants to change themselves to like a degree where
Right.
they need hormones and therapy and surgery
Right.
potentially, that they still have an immense amount of distress associated with
It's trust, right?
their identity, which would I would say some of it isn't a societal factor, and so that's why I think
Right.
that it would maybe that should stay maintained on there. I just wanted to bring that up for just to be
And I
contextually
think you
accurate.
touch on a really good point, right? Because you're talking to someone, from a very accepting family, right? And to a gay community, I was introduced pretty early on, right? And yet still so accepting. No one in my family questioned me, and still, right, the mustache bothered me. Even
Right,
with my
right,
personal
right.
society,
Yeah,
everyone around me. Oh, I had my first makeup set when I was 5 years old, homeboy, and yet the mustache still happened when I was 12,
right,
right? And that's what the issue is. And I think that I just wanted to supplement your point by being like, again, personal example of what you're saying makes perfect sense.
right. Now I know this is like I know I asked like these ridiculous, not ridiculous, but like some of them are
But
intense.
no, love
But
ridiculous questions.
there
Yeah.
there are some people, right? So we talked about we had mentioned or you had mentioned it before that being trans, and I know we still have to get into gender
Fluid. Yeah.
fluidity.
Gender
Yeah,
fluid.
yeah. I
Yeah.
know.
Of
I'm
course.
just we're almost there. I
Of
know.
course. Of course.
Some people are concerned because nowadays there's like it seems like there's like a woke culture
Oh, right.
where they'll like they want their parents or people in general want to seem woke, and like
Mhm.
you had said before, being trans is a mixture between I would say the biological predispositions as well as environmental factors in every
Right.
individual, different mixture between the two.
Different mixture between the two. Very complicated,
Yeah,
right? Yeah.
right. And I would say that some people's issues come to like the idea of like a 4-year-old potentially choosing their gender and then like it
Right.
being reinforced very heavily. And I think that there's an argument to be
Oh.
made that you could potentially manufacture
Oh,
the
right.
being
Yeah.
trans in somebody with like
Right.
constantly not enforcing some type of gender role. And so I don't know what your thought process on that is because some
That's
people
a
like,
great question.
well, like for instance, like if my kid was like, "Hey, I want a Moana doll," like I would get my kid. If it was a boy,
Right.
I would get him a Moana doll. I don't care. But then
Yeah.
there's some parents who'd be like, "Oh, you like Moana? Well, what about dresses?" And like they just
What
continue the
about this,
curve.
this,
Yeah, and
that,
they,
and the other,
you know,
right? And I think that is such an interesting point that I know a lot of people are concerned about, right? And it's so interesting because people assume that we're like, that we're all in the same boat. Like people are always like, oh, what gender neutral names do you have for your kid? And I'm like,
Mhm.
whoever is going to name my kid something gender neutral. Just
Right.
because I'm gender fluid doesn't necessarily mean my kid is going to be entirely gender neutral, right? I do think kids drop hints early on,
Mhm.
right? Um, but right, it is very hard to manufacture, right?
Mhm.
And I think the one example, right, which also could be seen as a counterexample in a way, right? But we did have a case I'm forgetting the name, right? But we did have a kid. I don't know how old your following is, and this I wouldn't talk about on
They,
TikTok because
they
some of my
c-
students follow
oh
me.
yeah,
We're
they could
getting
be like
exclusive
young.
content here, right? So I wouldn't necessarily bring this up on TikTok because I have a little bit younger of an audience sometimes. But we do have an instance where there was a boy that was born, right?
Hmm.
And he tried to get a procedure when he was born because that happens when you're born. The
Right.
doctor screwed it up big time.
So
The doc
somebody who is born is the
no
term
someone Okay, so
would be like an
let's use all the words.
intersex.
We're going to use all the words
Yeah,
here.
are you talking about somebody
So
that
the
was
boy was born, right?
okay?
And
Did they
it
have
was from a
both
family.
genitalia?
Not quite, right? So here's
Okay.
how the story goes. The
Okay.
boy was born and the family wanted him circumcised. The
Okay.
doctor screwed up big time.
Okay.
Big time. So the doctor and the nurse got together and said, "Wow, we really screwed this up." And they suggested to the parent to continue and make a slight alteration and to raise this boy as a girl.
Uh-huh.
The parents actually agreed. This actually happened, right? I wrote a
Okay.
full paper on it in college, right? This actually happened. This entire boy's life, even though being raised as a girl, right, had the surgery from a young age because of a botched circumcision, felt like something was off.
Mm-hmm.
He got all girl clothes. He got everything girly. He looked like a girl. Something was off. And his parents, when he turned, I want to say 16, said, "Listen, you were actually born a boy. They botched the circumcision. We've been raising you as a girl the whole time." And it made sense to him. And he transitioned to a boy. And I bring up this story because one, it's the only documented case we have about the
Sure.
situation that you're bringing up, right? And two, I think it points to a trend, right? That even with heavy conditioning, kids know who they are.
Mhm.
And it's rough, right? Kids know who they are.
Right.
I've yet to meet a boy. I've yet to meet a boy who I could convince makeup is cool to if I wanted to. And I don't even
Right.
try. I'm not in the business. Oh, I am not in the business, right? But I've never been able to convince a child to change any part of their gender aspect that
Mhm.
they do not do completely naturally. And me, of course, I have to be especially careful not to push it, right? I'm a professional educator. If ever anyone ever assumed like, oh, Desi wants his kids to be, gender neutral, that would not be good. So I'm very careful to not even touch on those subjects,
Mhm.
right? But even if I wanted to, kids are
Mhm.
very tenacious, right? So that's the only argument that I would give
No,
you.
it's a
Maybe
good
that
argument.
story.
It's actually a good argument.
Yeah,
The only thing I would say, and
yeah,
I'm not invalidating what
yeah.
you said
Tell me.
because it makes very much sense to me, is like we had talked before. I mean, like we could both agree that there's a very small percentage of people who are trans, and then we had
Right,
talked about biological predispositions to being trans. So I would say that
right,
you know, without the biological, if you have, let's say this, I mean, it's very, we could assume that that person didn't have the biological predisposition that they would want to
right.
be trans.
Exactly, right,
So I would say
right.
that in the case, and it would be an outlier, I'm proving myself wrong
It
to an
would be an
extent.
outlier. I
If
love
somebody
those.
was, yeah, right. So like if this person had the biological predisposition, it could make you
Right,
them gravitate more towards like trans, if you didn't reinforce gender roles. But then I think it comes to, and I'm not saying generally speaking because it's a very
right. Of
but
course.
then it comes to like, do you believe in like like I don't want to say traditional. I don't believe in traditional gender roles. I believe that gender roles are constantly changing. But do you believe in like gender roles in general?
Right,
Yeah,
and
like what's your
whoa, right,
interpretation on
and
that?
that's a huge question, right? That's a good one. And I want to, and here I'm thinking to myself like, oh, how am I going to dodge this one, Desi? How am I going to be
I don't
unproblematic
think
on
you've been
this one?
dodging any of them. I just think that
Oh,
yeah,
you.
no.
Am I doing okay? Thank
No, I
you.
don't think you dodge any
Okay,
question. I think that you're just answering in like,
yeah, okay, that I appreciate
yeah,
that.
no, I
Thank
don't
you.
think you're
Okay.
dodging at all.
So I think gender roles, right? We always need to take into consideration like the societal aspect of it, right?
Hmm.
Um and I think that's important, right? But are there actual gender roles? I think there's biology.
Hmm.
I think biology can never be discounted, right? And for that, I will never, I am a firm believer of science. Science is important. Science proves that being gay is natural, right? I can't use that to prove being gay is natural, but then say that there's no biological, predispositions, right? But with this said, maybe I can use it to kind of prove my point
Hmm.
that naturally there are some gender traits, naturally, right?
Hmm.
And I feel like there are naturally some gender traits. We've done brain scans, we've had the neurochemistry run. Women on average are more compassionate and feel empathy easier, right? But my only argument would be maybe this could actually work in our favor, right? In the way that, okay, at least we now know that being trans is real because
Hmm.
it's not all societally constructed, right?
Hmm.
If there's actually some natural gender classifiers and some natural gender roles, maybe we can actually be like, see, trans, that's an actual thing. Because naturally, if you feel a little bit more naturally like a woman, if you're naturally more compassionate,
Hmm.
maybe you really are naturally trans, right? So, are there some natural aspects to gender identities? Yes, right? Gender roles, that depends on societal context, right?
Hmm.
But gender identities, oh, absolutely, right? We
Sure, yeah.
see women, and their brains light up with conversation. And I honestly, to this day, think mine lights up the same way because I love talking, right? And I
Hmm.
think that's part of my gender fluid identity. I think I get the same cocaine shot that women get when they have conversations with people. And that's a biological neurochemistry thing, right?
Hmm.
But the roles are societal context, and that's the only thing I would say.
I get that. But for me, just very simply, like I would probably try to raise
Yeah.
my kid more in line with like societal constructs. Kind of. Well, maybe that's not even true. I would try to teach my
Well, I
kids to
get
be
that.
strong in general. Like, you know what I
I
mean? I feel
no,
like
that makes a lot of sense, right?
there's not
That
enough
makes a lot
strength.
of sense.
I think that and like not to get off topic, but I think a problem
Yeah,
when it comes
right.
to like, and I'm not somebody who embraces the wage gap in the traditional way. I'm somebody who embraces the
Right.
gender wage gap in a way that like where we don't value femininity enough in society. And I think one of
Right.
those ways that we kind of do that is that we don't teach women to be strong and stand up for themselves. You know,
Yeah.
yeah. And I don't want to get we don't have to get into a whole that could be a conversation for
Right.
another day if you wanted.
I
Um,
got that. Right. Of course,
yeah,
I'm ready to
because
chat.
I don't want to, then we'll have like a
Right.
3 hour conversation. We'll just go over the place.
Right. Right. Right.
But what you're talking about is very interesting because like um, it brings up the idea of like what it means to like, I guess, to be gender fluid. And I
Right.
guess we'll get into that because like the idea of like why,
Right.
yeah,
Right.
why? There you go. I'm just not even gonna like
Right. Like,
why.
why even that? Right.
Do you
And I
consider
think that's a great
gender?
question.
Do you consider
Yeah.
gender fluidity like trans?
Oh, great question, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so okay, that is a great question. Um, so again, I could only speak for myself on this one. There are some people that are gender fluid, that are like, oh, I'm absolutely trans, right? But personally, if someone walked up to me on the street and said, "Are you trans?" I would say, "No, I'm not," right?
Mhm.
And maybe that's just my inner teacher, right? Because trans means to shift from one to another, right?
Mhm.
And my shift, right, is gender fluid. That's the shift. My shift is gender fluid within the gender construct, but I'm not going from one place to another and staying there, right? Trans,
Right.
that's the prefix we're dealing with. Trans means from one location to another. Transatlantic, transport, right?
Mhm.
Transition. We need one position, and again, this is my inner teacher speaking. But
Mhm.
to transport, we need to start at one position and get to another position. And gender fluid people don't do that, right?
Mhm.
We go a little bit back and forth,
Right.
but we don't end at a location. So with that said, I'm not going to discount anyone that says being gender fluid is part of the trans umbrella. But I definitely do not identify as trans myself. But if
Okay.
somebody gender fluid wants to, oh, you go for it, homegirl.
Okay, so you had mentioned before you separate gender pronouns rather pronouns from gender. So, you know,
Yeah,
so we'll stick to more of like the gender. So, when you say gender
yeah.
fluid, does that mean that you do switch to an extent or you flow back
And
and
that's
forth through
a
the
great,
spectrum?
yeah, another great question, right? We have some people, right? I have one friend, right, who and we have other cases of this too that I've heard of, but that they wake up and they are either 100% male or they
Mhm.
are 100% female, and they change their pronouns daily. And I'm calling them they right now, because I'm not sure what they are right now today,
Right, yeah.
right? And I am not that gender fluid, right? And gender fluid also can be the idea of representing more than one gender at a time, right? We
Mhm.
then added a term bi gender to mean specifically that, right?
Mhm.
So now we have a new term bi gender that means, oh, you're a little bit of one and then a little
Right.
bit of the other.
So it gets
But
confusing for some people who live
it
outside
is,
of like the
oh my
LG,
God.
and it's like one of the
I
things where people who live outside of it, it's hard for them to keep up because I think
I
that
studied 4 years. I studied 4 years at Dartmouth College. I have a gender studies major, and there are still words that pop up on TikTok, and they're like, "Desi, what does this mean?" I'm like, "I have no freaking clue
yeah,
what that
right.
means.
And some
What are
people
you
just get
talking?"
overwhelmed. Like I
And
think
then I have to do my research, right? So of course it can be confusing. So with that said, though, the idea of gender fluid is the reason why I stick with it so much is that gender fluid implies movement, and
Mhm.
it implies that the way I am right now may not be the way I am tomorrow, and it may not be the way I am 5 years from now, right? And I think that's important to say, because there was a time when I was 9 years old and I was Reggie, dude. In third grade, I was Reggie for 3 months. People called me Reggie. I hung out with the girls. You better call me Reggie. And then, right, sixth grade hit and Call of Duty happened. And I was definitely not Reggie. Not to say that girls can't play Call of Duty. Oh, but homeboy, I was with the boys running Search and Destroy and cussing people out on Xbox Live.
Right,
I
you're
was not
toxic.
Reggie. Right? I was not Reggie anymore, right? I was not Reggie. I was someone else. I was Desmond, right? I was Dez, right? And then, right, you find the happy medium, you eliminate the toxicity of it all, right? And you get to where I am now. And I think the reason why I say I'm gender fluid instead of simply just saying I'm non-binary is because I appreciate the idea that maybe one day I have a kid and I realize I'm a certain gender in that relationship. Who knows, right? I might shift. Or I might wake up tomorrow and I might be a little bit more masculine and I'll take off the lipstick, right?
Right. And
And
that's
yeah.
what, so do you associate that shift in masculinity to a shift in the way that I know that you have pronouns, but how you internally identify? Because you brought up a good point before where you had you said you identified as Reggie at one point in a more feminine sense, and then once you played Call of Duty, you started to get more masculine. And so like now it comes to the idea of, because everybody, I think, has these feelings. So for me, maybe I wake up one day more feminine. I don't know what that'd be. Maybe I'm feeling more compassionate one day.
Right.
I wake up more masculine. I feel ugly or something. But for me, that's just like I feel a little bit different on a day to day.
You just feel a little bit different.
So why that would come to the question, because people would ask like, why? So for you or other people, it seems like that's like a whole identity shift. And I would say, why exactly is that? Or could you explain that?
Great question. And I'd love to reword it because you said it way too nice, right? You're being way too nice to me. Because really what you kind of mean, and I'm not saying you actually mean it this way because you're very respectful, right? But it's like, what the hell, dude? People's personality changes all the time. What makes you so special to call yourself?
What makes you put so much value into it? Yeah.
Call you different pronouns just because you feel a little bit more. I feel girly some days. Why are you so special, right? And I think that is a fantastic question. And I think if people ask that more, the boys and LGBTQ would get along a little bit better, right? And I get that all the time. And I always make sure to answer that question in my comment section of, Desi, why the hell call yourself gender fluid? Why not just be a masculine guy sometimes or a feminine guy sometimes?
Yeah, right. That's a question too, because then we also have like another movement where like, you don't want to invalidate feminine men or masculine women.
Right.
And sometimes it feels like it can get a little bit messy with different types of
So thank you so much for bringing it up. Fantastic, right? And my question is, and this is actually a question for you, right? Because I don't know the answer to this, right? And I could actually come out with this feel like, with a new perspective. But if I wake up and I'm feeling very feminine, right? Let's say it's a Sunday and I'm not seeing anyone. I'm seeing no one, right? And it is a Sunday and I wake up and homegirl, the 6-foot rainbow weave is dangling in the wind. It's not there. No one can see it, but I feel it, right? I feel the rainbow weave. I will get up and I will put on the makeup because to not have it on is uncomfortable, right? Right. And that's to me, right? To look in the mirror, right? Some days I'll wake up on a Sunday, right? And I'm not saying that I struggle with it, right? It's just it's a part of me. There's some days on Sunday I will wake up and I'll be like, all I have is dance today. But I'm like, that in the mirror, that's not matching what's in here. That's not I need to fix that, right? So my question for you would be like, okay, you may wake up feeling a little bit more feminine some days, but do you ever wake up feeling that you need to fix something about your appearance?
Right. So I get what you're saying.
Question.
No, it's a good question because it brought us back to like before.
Oh
yeah. No, I understand what you're saying because it brought us back to before with like our interpretations of ourselves and like what. Again, not to be blunt, but like what do we need as like the treatment method to it? So if I wake up more feminine one day, I don't know. I don't even know. I don't even pay attention enough to it to even have some kind of potential. You know what I'm saying?
I get that.
So no, it's actually a very good. It's a very good point that you brought up. It kind of makes more sense. It's a slow grow.
A little bit more sense, right? But you have a point, right? And then you wonder, right? Oh, here and now I'm giving you some ammunition for an argument back, right? Is that we talk about how this is all biology, right? And it's natural. But what if, get this, right? And here I don't know the answer, but I'm setting myself up to possibly be wrong on this one.
Mhm.
What if I grew up in a family that was very traditional and conservative?
Mhm.
And in that family, boys could not wear makeup, and
Mhm.
they couldn't sound like me, and they couldn't act like me, and they couldn't dance. Would I actually grow up being trans
Mhm.
instead of gender fluid? Like that was a 7-page essay in my
This,
college, right?
yeah, I think it goes back to like the biological predisposition. It's like
Right.
person by
So,
person. Most people
right.
probably wouldn't have necessarily an impact on them, but then again, if there's somebody with a
You never
predisposition,
know.
you never
Right.
know.
You
Yeah,
never know.
that's
Right.
why
And I
I.
think that's a great,
Yeah, no,
yeah.
sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off.
No, I was
Oh yeah, I
gonna
was
say,
gonna
yeah,
say
I was
that's
gonna say,
why I usually don't go with the biological conversations when it comes to gender, because I think that like gender is very, to me, well, a lot of times when I start off with people who don't validate trans people, I start off with the idea of valuing the mind as much as we value the body
mhm,
now, and then using
right.
gender as like the mind, and then like sex is the body, and then different people
Right.
having different assignments of values, and like talking
I
about
get
how,
that.
yeah, society has gotten just tremendously better when we value the mind overall. That's how we have
Overall.
technology, right? That's usually what I start with. I try to stay, I keep it in a more looser, not that there
Yeah.
aren't biological things, but I like to keep it
There
more,
are, right.
loose, because
Keep
that's
it
just
loose,
me.
right? Because that's the thing, right? And that whole idea of keeping things loose, right, is again why I call myself gender fluid instead of just non-binary or trans, right? Is the idea of there's a little bit of looseness here that we need to identify with, that we need to accept, right? It's not static. And I think that's really important. But I do appreciate that question.
Yeah, yeah.
And I do
Appreciate the
and
answer
I
at
do
least.
appreciate, and I also want to give people shout outs, right? To girls that wake up a little feeling more masculine but don't feel like they can call themselves trans, or boys that want to show emotion more but that they don't want to give themselves a trans label. There's some pressures, right? And I don't want to discount that experience, right? But I think it comes down to, you may feel a little bit more feminine, a little bit more masculine, but do you ever feel like there is something not right? And that I
Right.
think would be
And it,
my that would be like my check the box or don't check the box
no,
type
but
thing.
that
And
makes
that's all.
that makes sense, because a lot of times when I talk about things, I talk about, again, the treatment kind of a method. And if it's like
Right.
just like an
Right.
internalized, like, oh, I just need to do this, and it makes perfect sense to me.
Right.
So I have a question, because I don't know what the fuck this is. One of my, sorry for cursing, one of my
No, don't worry
commenters
about it.
one of my commenters asked me, they said, Papa, you're focusing so much on gender dysphoria, but not enough on gender euphoria. I don't know what that is. I don't know if you know what that is.
Okay.
I don't understand what they were saying. So I figured I'd ask you.
Okay. We have different, okay, that's a newer one, right? And we don't have a dead set definition,
Mhm.
right? For it yet, right? So here's the idea. Um, Gender dysphoria. We got the idea of what you're focusing on, which I think is
Mhm.
a great focus. And I think you've picked this apart. You're an expert in it just as much as I am, right? So it's
Maybe. I don't know about
amazing,
that.
right?
Maybe.
So, I mean, I have a little bit of a lived experience, but clearly you know your stuff on dysphoria. And that's the idea that you feel like something is wrong. And in this conversation, I've focused on that too thus far, right? Which is the idea of you need to fix something that is wrong. I just did an entire argument about,
Mhm.
oh, well, it is something wrong, right? Now, the gender euphoria is the opposite, right?
Mhm.
That's when we get into the idea of you have a new sense of energy and self when you represent the other gender, right?
Mhm.
You may not think something is wrong, but do you feel a type of euphoria, happiness, and
Right. Like something
contentment
is right.
is when something is right.
That's fair. Yeah, I
Right.
think
So
you touched on it a little bit. But
I
okay,
touched on it a little bit, right? I
that
touched on it
makes
a little
sense.
bit. And I haven't used that exact word, right? But the idea of, like, it's not just when I wake up on Sunday and I'm not going to see anyone. It's not just the dysphoria of,
Mhm.
oh, I'm a little stubbly down here. I don't have any pink cheeks. It's a little bit of dysphoria there, right? But
Mhm.
it's also a little bit of euphoria, right?
Right.
When I get the makeup on and I'm like, oh, who is
I that,
that
that I
in
mean, it makes
here,
sense.
right?
No, it's like the
And
same
that,
as me buying a something. I don't know. Going
yeah,
out
I
to,
know that you got a
I
nice
get what you're
blazer, you
saying.
got
Yeah.
some,
Yeah.
right? So I got that. And that is something, that is something that cannot be discounted, right? And I think that the euphoria and the idea of feeling when something clicks, right? When something is right, that definitely counts, right? And I have to tell you, right? I probably got a little bit of my name, Desi, from that euphoria, right?
Mhm.
I never thought there was anything wrong with Desmond. My username is Desmond Fambrini. There's nothing wrong with Desmond. I like the name.
Mhm.
But a kid, when I was, I must have been 16 years old, and she just Desi came out of her mouth instead of Desmond. It was like that felt right, right?
So is your
That
not to be asking personal of a question. So is your
yeah,
birth name Desmond, and then you prefer Desi?
Desmond, yes,
I
Desmond,
see.
right? But Desi, right?
Mhm.
It's a little bit more
That's your
gender neutral. It
yeah.
has a little bit of a feminine flair. There's a little bit of euphoria there, you know? Like Desmond, I'll be a yes queen, right? But and
Right.
Desmond is
I
fine.
get that.
Desi's like a little bit of a yes queen there, right? And that's the idea of like the euphoria. I never thought there was anything wrong with my name. Some trans people, their name is dead. That is
Yeah, it's very
dysphoria right
triggering
there.
for them if
But
you use it.
with other people like me, there's no dysphoria with my birth name, right? But there is a little bit of a euphoria with my new little Desi title, right? And I think
Mhm.
that also needs to be counted, right? But with that said, I would probably push back a little bit on the person that commented being like, oh, well, you're not focusing on euphoria because you're trying to get to the bottom of what qualifies like
Yeah,
justification,
I think that they
validation.
meant it
Yeah.
nicely. No, I didn't.
Okay, good,
I
good,
might
good.
have presented what they said more aggressively
Okay, I got
because
you. But
no,
no,
yeah,
no, no,
yeah.
no.
I don't think they were being rude. It was just a good point that
Okay,
they
good,
brought
good.
up. I don't. They didn't
Great.
curse.
Yeah, but it's
I curse. I'm like, just being a
no,
little
it's totally fine.
flavorful. Yeah,
And you
yeah.
know, I swear to myself, I just am so worried that for me it's going to become a habit, and I'm going to say it around one of my kids, and I'm going to be like, oh god. But it's totally fine with me. I don't judge people at all. But with that said, there is a euphoria aspect, right?
Sure, that makes
And I
sense.
think that is important to acknowledge, right? Is that some people don't necessarily feel like there is something wrong, but their heart lights up when they have the wig on,
Right, when there's
or
something
their
right.
heart lights up when they hear they them pronouns, right? And I think that's important and not to be discounted, right? And again, for me, it's like, there was no dysphoria with he him, but there was dysphoria with Mr. or Sir. And there's
Right.
a euphoria, right, with the name Desi. And that's kind of where we have the two different sides.
It makes
Great that you
sense.
picked up on that.
It makes sense. It's so silly, not to relate it to like when I was younger. Like I know
Yeah.
this is very different, but like I used to like my name. Like my name is actually Daniel, right? So
Got it. I
I
was wondering if I got to
yeah, yeah.
perfect.
So
Okay.
I used to like to
Very
be
cool.
called Dan, but like I always insisted it had two N's.
Oh, love
So
it.
like and like it's not just to relate it to that. Like there was no reason for me to do
Right.
that, but it made me happy, right? So we're talking
But it
about
made
gender
you happy.
euphoria,
There's a
right?
little bit of
So
euphoria
I
there.
can kind of get it, right? Like if I was
I
going to use my experience, now everybody's going
Yeah,
crazy
I
because I
know
told
it's
them my
and
name.
that's and I appreciate you taking like that personal turn and that personal context.
Yeah.
And I think that's great, right? And it's good that we're acknowledging it and it's that's just important. And I appreciate that for sure, for sure.
Now my chat's going crazy. I never told them my name at all since the start.
Ah, you're
Yeah, yeah. So now they know the first name. So
we
you
got the
know,
reveal,
I
guys. We
know.
got
Yeah, I've been trying to keep it.
the
I've been trying to keep it private, but it is what it is.
what can you do? What can
Yeah,
you do?
What is it? What are you gonna do? So I had, I guess, like one other question. It's about.
Yeah, totally.
Pre-
I have time for it. Yeah, one more. Yeah.
okay, yeah. Oh, yeah. Sorry, I don't know when you have to
Oh no,
bang
it's
out.
totally fine. School board election. I'm talking at a school board Zoom tonight. I have to get
Okay.
ready at around 6:40 or so. But this has been amazing.
Okay.
If you have
Yeah.
any more questions, you know where to hit me up,
Yeah, of
right? But
course. I mean, I'd
I
love to
got
have you
one more
back
for sure
on.
for you.
I'm just curious about what your thought of my preferences are, and like, what do you think that when it comes to like trans individuals, like being attracted to trans people, like, do you think that like a straight
Ooh,
individual not being attracted to a trans woman is like, do you think that makes them transphobic,
that is
or
that's a great question, right? And so actually I did a video on this, right? And actually got a little bit I got a little bit of hate because I went against the fray a little bit. Now with this said, if you are dating someone, you're having a great time with them, and it's going great, da 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 da, and they go, "Oh, I'm trans," and you go, "Whoa, I'm not into this anymore." I'd be
Mhm,
like, that wasn't very nice, right?
mhm. Sure.
But but with that said, right? And you know me, I like speaking from personal experience. That's my thing, right? It's hard to insult people if you speak from personal experience, right?
Mm,
Let's say one day because gender fluid, right? Let's say I'm having a really femme day, right? Which doesn't happen super often. I always have that masculine side too. But let's say I have a super feminine day. I put on the makeup and everything, right? And I see a really cute guy outside. And I'm like, oh, do you wanna go out sometime? And he goes, oh no, I'm straight. But I'm like, but I'm identifying as a girl. Is he transphobic? Of course he's not transphobic.
right.
No way, right? Right? There's a limit there. That would be me asking way too much,
Mhm,
right? And that's the deal that I think we need to remember is there a perfect answer here? No, but what I would say is if you see someone as a trans individual and you are just not attracted to them, you
Mhm.
can't control your attraction. It's a fact, right? And I don't think we should call anyone transphobic for just saying, "Oh, I'm just not attracted to that specific person." Maybe don't say I'm never attracted to trans people, right?
Mhm.
But right? If you're just like, "Hey, I'm not attracted to them," you can't control that.
Right.
And if you're physically not attracted to them, it's not ignorance, it's not bigotry, but you are physically not. What are you going to do? Force the person to be attracted?
Right. Yeah, it
That's
gets into a whole
right.
different
Then you
yeah,
get
right.
into a little bit of a hole. And what I tried to explain is because then I actually made a video being like, no, I don't think people are necessarily transphobic, right? If they just are like, oh, I'm seeing you as a male, Desi,
Mhm.
and I don't want to date you, period. I don't think that's transphobic. I got a little bit of flack from that. And I understand that. But with that said, right, my community, LGBTQ, all about loving people
Mhm.
naturally,
Sure.
right? Not forcing us to love a certain way, right? So I can't be like, you have to let me be bisexual, Papa Gut. You have to let me be bisexual, and then be like, oh, but you also have to like me when I'm feeling like a girl. Like that's
Right, I get
messed
that,
up,
yeah.
right? That's not cool. So there's that. That's the only thing I would say.
Right. No, I understand. So because I agree
Yeah,
with everything. And then we get to like the one point because I think that like when it comes to like outward expressions and like
yeah,
some trans individuals not necessarily looking like fully passable, and then of course you
right,
could see why like if, let's say in the instance of a fully straight man not wanting to engage with a trans woman that's not passable.
right.
I think the only place I differentiate is specifically at
Yeah,
the point of like if it's a fully passable, just seems what you alluded to them being fully passable versus like
right.
a cisgendered male.
I got that.
And then my idea, and I don't, and this is me personally, I don't
Right.
think that it's transphobic to not want to engage with a trans woman, even if they're fully passable.
Got it.
And you don't, then you learn like, oh, it's actually a,
Yeah,
trans.
biologically,
Yeah,
yes.
yeah, yeah. I try to
Yeah,
stay away from the
I
biological
got
thing,
that.
but because like for me, being trans obviously is very much about mental perception of yourself. And
Right.
then of course, if somebody still sees you as a man in a not in
Hmm.
a respectful way, in the sense of like, oh, I don't want to date you because I still like, it's their mental fragility. It's
Right.
like, oh, you're still a man in my
Right.
eyes. I don't
Right.
think that's necessarily transphobic.
I
I
got
just
that.
think that
Right.
that's
And
just a
yeah.
matter of personal perception. Of course, when it comes to any type of violence, that's like a no-no.
Right. And I 100% understand that, right? And then again, right? I'll have to, because I like to do this, right? We've made a little bit of progress in racial equality. We still have a long way to go, but I run what's called the race check, right? I switch
Mhm.
out gender or trans with race, right? And I would substantiate your point, being like, if someone says, "Hey, I'm okay dating some black guys, right? But on average, I'm not too attracted to them." Are they racist? Not really. No,
I
they
wouldn't
have a
say so.
preference, right? You know what I mean?
Yeah,
So if
sure.
someone's like, and I think that comes down to how you phrase it, right? So if you say like, on average, trans isn't really my type. That's just not really my thing.
Hmm.
I'd be like, I get that. That's a preference. You can't do anything about that. But if you were like, never in the history of the world am I ever going to be caught with someone who is trans, then I'd be like, maybe, who
I
knows?
understand.
Maybe I
It's
can
it's
find
the
someone.
it's the it's the perceived like hatred behind their words
It's
more
the
than it
perceived
is.
hatred,
Yeah,
right?
yeah, I get
So
that
I
definitely.
actually think we align on that, right?
Yeah,
So
I
and,
get
and
that.
I think that we align because I completely understand that, right? Of
Mhm.
like, hey, this person biologically was born as something different. I can't find myself being attracted to that. I'm not going to be mad at you for that, right? But I'm just not going to say maybe don't declare and swear off everyone in the trans community,
Right, I
right?
get that.
Because then I have to make it my life's mission to find a really cute trans woman for you, Papa Gut, and then
Well,
I'll
no,
have
but
to do some.
I'm not. See, I'm not coming from
No, I'm
personal
just
experience.
kidding.
No, because I'm not coming from personal experience. I actually would date a trans
Right, I
person.
know. But
Yeah, yeah.
the point,
I've talked to trans men and women. Like, I don't care.
yeah, of course, right?
Yeah, yeah.
But no,
But
no,
I
that's the
understand the
point.
perspective of it.
And it's a great perspective. And again, I agree with you, right? Is it transphobic? No, it's a preference, right?
Mhm.
But if you make a declarative statement, all of them are unattractive, or all black men, right? All black males, because biologically I'm male, right? If somebody says to me, all black males are unattractive, I'd be like, it's a little racist,
Yeah,
right?
no. That I
But if
think
they
that the phrase would be like, "I'm not attracted to black men." Right.
Right.
That would
But
be
if
yeah,
someone said
yeah.
a little bit more like, oh, I'm not really that into black guys most of the time, I'd be like, okay. Can't
Yeah,
really,
right. That's fine.
biology, chemical reactions are chemical reactions. And I would say the same if someone said something to me about being gender fluid, being like, hey, Desi, you're a cool person. Gender fluid, not really my type. I'd be like, deuces, you're missing out. No, just kidding.
No,
But,
hey, listen, you have to have that personal
but,
confidence, of course.
the idea is, you can't judge people for who they're naturally attracted to.
Sure.
And I think that's a really slippery slope if we start doing that in the LGBTQ community, right? We start judging people for not being attracted to us, right? And that's a different story. And I think that's what I've warned, a couple of my community members on this. And we don't always, see eye to eye, but I'm involved in the community, right? Of our idea, we want to be accepted and we want to be respected. I don't know if we should be arguing also attracted in that. I don't know if we want to add that, right? I don't think we're ready to add that. I'm down to fight for respect. I'm down to fight for equality. I don't know if really fighting for you to be attracted to me is a fight that I want to take on.
Yeah, especially right now. Yeah, right. Like we'll get there eventually.
I'm gonna let that one lie, right? I'm gonna choose my battles here, right? I'm gonna choose my battles and be like, hey, you respect me. You think I'm a good teacher regardless of what I put on my face. You and I are cool. And if you don't want to date me, I'll find someone else. Have a great rest of your day. So I let that one, I let that one ride a little bit until we're ready for it in the future.
Yeah, no, I think that we could as a society get to that point, honestly.
We'll get there,
we're definitely not there now,
We're not there yet. We'll get there, right? We'll get there.
I know but to say, I know you have to go.
I gotta run now, but this has been absolutely so much fun.
No, I appreciate you coming on.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, thank you for coming on. Maybe we could have you again, or we could play Roblox together or something one day.
Oh, Roblox and having me again. I'm going to hit you up on both
Sounds
of those
fantastic.
Okay, I'll see you later.
Take care. Thank you for coming on.
Bye.
Have a good one.
I want to say thank you so much, guys, to all my Patreons, and a special shout out to my Papa XL Patreons. Without all you guys, I would just be some fat dude screaming into a microphone. So thank you so much, guys. Mwah. I love you all. I want Papa Gut to pee on my face, but just as a friend. There's nothing weird about that. I want him to pee on my face.